The preface, basically the premise for why we're trying to shift towards an outcomes-focused approach to delivering sustainability is this problem. That actually as an industry, we're full of experts, we're full of professionals, but actually we don't know what we're building, by and large. We wouldn't accept this for any other product in our lives. If you bought a smartphone or another piece of technology and the manufacturer said, well, actually, I don't really know how it's going to perform, you wouldn't buy it. But this is what we do with buildings all the time. So, as an example, when we deal with operational energy, this is a sort of an example building. The small portion on the left is the regulated bit. That's the bit we try and assess on every building. And in fact, the way we do it, we all know is a compliance tool. It's not actually about performance. It's about a method of sort of standardizing compliance. And so even this tiny first bit, the performance gap between what we designed to what performance is might be 5 or even 10 times, some studies have found. And then we're only assessing using a compliance tool, not actual performance, not design performance. And then we add on all the other things that we know buildings do, but most of us don't ever find out how we're performing on. We've just made some assumptions in the design and hoped for the best. So what we're trying to do with Sustainable Futures Group at present is sort of 3 things around outcomes. One of which is to try and establish, as Craig said, a very flexible model, because we have to cover everything from house extension to a massive regeneration scheme, but something which is a robust definition of sustainability and one which is holistic and covers all the bases, and that we can kind of hang all projects off and that we use common language. If you look through even just the RBA's guidance at the moment, and the existing plan of work and overlays, the language we use to describe sustainability, the language we use to describe each of the checkpoints and the processes we go through vary from document to document, from profession to profession. And so what we're trying to do is, within the RBA, and also with other bodies like CIBSE and ICE and others, standardize the language we're using and the framework we're hanging all this off of. And have a process when we're trying to deliver sustainability, which is about setting objectives, setting these outcomes, and then actually checking that these outcomes are delivered. And making that straightforward for the profession through guidance and CPD, and starting to make it more normal. So this isn't something that big expensive projects or cutting edge teams convince clients to do, or pioneering clients tell their design teams that they want as a special thing on one particular project or another, but that we just do it because it's standard and it's included in the plan of work, it's included in what we expect from design teams, and it's not a kind of add-on cost that everyone tries to value engineer out. And if we zoom out, we're starting from the point of 2 things, really. One of which is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which are obviously this very wide, very broad, very global view of how we should be trying to deliver sustainability, not just for the built environment. And we need to be thinking as an industry how we fit into the wider context of making our activities as human beings on this planet more sustainable. And also, some of you may have looked at this, the RBA's Sustainability and Ethics Commission's report, which is looking at how the RBA, or reflecting on how the RBA is doing at the moment, and how it should move in the future in terms of balancing the interests of the profession, which is one thing it does, and also, as a licensor, sort of a group of licensed professionals, balancing the interests of the planet, society, and the wider good. And that's something which is a sort of difficult gap to bridge. So you'll see as we move on to the next few slides, looking at these outcomes that we're looking at, we're sort of zooming in from the sustainability goals down to a set of outcomes. And this is sort of draft content, and we're going through consultation at the moment on it. And if any of you want to be involved or give feedback or contribute to this, come and find us afterwards and have a chat. The more opinions we can get on this, the better this stuff will be. So the idea of, and if you've submitted an RBA award this year, you will have seen these 4 headings, trying to distill down what sustainability is into something that is flexible and we can hang content off of. Out of interest, how many of you did or were involved in projects that submitted for RBA awards? Oh, 2 of you, and you both presented. 3. Okay, there we go. That's an interesting survey in itself. And so we're trying to make this both flexible and easy to manage, and something which all members of a design team, including the client, including facilities managers, all these people that need to be engaged, can understand, but also dig into some stuff which ethical sourcing of materials, sustainable drainage, an obvious one, but sometimes things about designing for end of life, for example, cradle-to-cradle design, trying to get this in there and hang it off of this framework. And from that, we're starting to pull out, this is a sort of initial starting point, 7 metrics that we will start to try and embed into best practice of saying that if you're going to do a sort of core assessment of how you've done on a project and the outcomes you've delivered, you should, at the very least, understand where you sort of fit on this kind of bullseye chart for these metrics. How are you doing in terms of operational energy and carbon? How are you doing in terms of water and ecology? And this is sort of still in process, and so if it doesn't look quite like that when you see the final thing, that's don't be surprised. And trying to find, this isn't, I should clarify, about trying to create another certification scheme. There are plenty around. There are plenty of systems for assessing buildings and setting these metrics and benchmarking yourself. We are not, as the RBA Sustainable Futures Group, trying to create another one. But what we're trying to do is create a framework by which people can plug in the way they are assessing their buildings and benchmark them against each other. So, well-being, we have the Well Building Standard as an example. Operational energy and carbon, we've got all sorts of different standards, from TM54 to Passive House, to some more sort of unusual in the UK at present standards like the Living Building Challenge that does net positive energy. And they all look at this in a slightly different way, but they all share key metrics about kilowatt hours per square meter per year, gross versus net. What is your building doing in terms of actually its gross usage? How much renewable energy is it producing? And so we can start then to benchmark buildings against each other and start to encourage people to pick one of these and use it. So for example, this is a Beer Architects project. It's an example, Lark Rise in Buckinghamshire. We've done a lot of work measuring the outcomes of that building with detailed monitoring. Not everyone's going to go to that degree, but we can show on that building exactly how the building is performing in reality. Embodied energy and carbon. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail, but it's just to give you some examples if some of you haven't seen metrics for some of these things. There is now an RBA and RICS approved whole life carbon assessment model. Water, the Living Building Challenge has a net positive water assessment system. Basically, does your building meet the absolute gold standard? Does it produce and collect more water than it uses every year? Does it treat it as it comes in and it goes out without any chemicals? And can you just return it essentially fresh to the environment? That's the gold standard. We should be benchmarking buildings against this kind of gold standard, regardless of what metric model you're using. And then we can start to actually compare buildings and understand how we're doing and how we're making progress. We don't expect everyone to be achieving 100% sustainability tomorrow, but if we don't benchmark ourselves and if we don't have comparable metrics and we don't have enough data from across the industry, we're never really going to be able to get our heads around whether we're making progress or not and where we're losing out and where we're not making progress. And some of these tools are really well known. So Living Building Challenge, again, has a habitat exchange for ecology. BREEAM has its own metrics, which you're all probably very familiar with, around ecology and biodiversity. BREEAM also now measures local transport. So one of these other metrics that we can start now to have as a sort of standard metric and outcome, local transport and how we're doing on that, and operational cost again. So my last slide, most of you by the sounds of it haven't seen these, but as was mentioned earlier, we have reworked the RBA sustainable criteria as part of the form that you submit if you are submitting for any RBA award. That's a regional award for an individual house, or it's all the way up to the Sterling Prize. And this is trying to do 2 things crudely, or 3 maybe. One of which is to make this process front and center in people's minds of saying, if you want an award, it should be a fantastic piece of design, but it should also be contributing to bettering sustainability for the profession. It should be an exemplar of design and sustainability. And it should be a collaborative process where we've got narratives from the design team, the architect, about what the overall strategy was, what you were trying to achieve, all the restrictions you had because of site and client, all of that sort of difficult to explain stuff, alongside really hard numbers about actually how is the building performing? And are these your Part L compliance numbers, or are they detailed sub-metering from the real building? So again, being able to assess what numbers we're being given from what people. And as part of this process as well, putting terms in front of design teams that they may not have seen before. So some of that terminology from back here in the grid, the details sort of that fall beneath this of actually the different strategies, embedding those in the form. So this is one of the first pieces essentially of, it's not best practice guidance, but it's a way of outing some of these terminologies and some of these outcomes. And we've had fantastic stories actually of, this is the second year, we ran a sort of prototype of this last year. This year it's been run again, and next year it will be an evolving thing which will evolve alongside the other work we're doing. And we've had a couple of people come to us and say, actually, we've started setting this as a client as part of the brief and saying, right, we really would like an award. So can you make sure you do some of this? We're not sure what all of it means, but we understand this is best practice, so let's do it.